Now, moving on, we've reached a frightening level of comfortable surveillance, as in we're eerily comfortable with the fact that we're constantly being monitored. And I mean that in as Orwellian a way as it comes across. Literally and figuratively speaking, our digital gadgets monitor just about everything about us, from our heart rate to our sex lives, and store that information for much more than our personal use. Indeed, these apps and programs are less a self-help tool and more of a bridge between the commodification of self and far overreaching government surveillance. Here to talk more about the all-seeing apps, how to combat the state's panopticon, and more is web developer and technologist Chris Garaffa. Take a look. Let's start with data collection via mobile apps, apps that track our every move and then sell that data on to the highest bidder. Could you walk us through the concept real quick? How does that chain of information work?
Sure. So the Facebook app itself collects a whole lot of information about you. It knows where you are, it knows who your friends are. It can figure out who's near you by figuring out where you are when you're using the app, and then figuring out who else is in your general area using the app. It knows obviously which events you've gone to and what events other people have gone to. And they use that for the people you might know feature, where it's weird how all those people you never really talked to are showing up in your feed already, right? But it's a little more sinister than that, too, because Facebook is actually tracking you all over the internet, too, right? So all these sites that have that little Facebook share button, they actually are adding code that your phone or your computer is running and sending information back to Facebook. And if you've also logged into Facebook from that same device, they can associate that with your Facebook account. So what they do is Facebook collects all of this information. They package it up and they say to advertisers, hey, you can target people down to people who are interested in these topics. It doesn't have to be that you said you were interested. It's just that you went to maybe some events, right, that were on that topic, or you like certain pages about that topic. It could be technology, it could be cars, it could be politics, it could be, anything. And then the advertisers can target you based on that. The thing with that is, once you've seen that advertisement, advertisers can also set up a unique tracking, identity for you and see where else you go on the internet. So if they have an ad on another page on the internet, they can actually use that information that they got from Facebook to then go back to you and figure out who you are, down to, sometimes down to actually your identity, your personal identity.
And what's scary about this is that it goes beyond even Facebook, of course. A Vice report came out in early January, which is headlined, "I gave a bounty hunter $300, then he located our phone." T-Mobile, Sprint, and AT&T are selling access to their customers' location data, and that data is ending up in the hands of bounty hunters and others not authorized to possess it. So basically this idea that private individuals and businesses are selling and trading in your private information.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, your cell phone company has to know where you are, or where your phone is, right? That's how it works. It goes off that tower, it gets to your phone. You want to have the closest tower to you sending a signal to your phone so that your internet connection works or your voice call doesn't drop. So that it has to, they have to know that. The problem is that they are selling this information to private agencies, and they can use that to, in this case, it was a bounty hunter, but they also are selling it to advertising firms. And I think this is a great article, and I think people should go read it. Joseph Cox, who's the researcher behind it, and the journalist, did a lot of really great a lot of great work doing this and also explaining how this works. So yeah, they actually are selling this information to private companies. And then what's worse than that is they can sell it to private companies who then resell it. They repackage it, they resell it, and they bundle it up. And you don't know, even if you know who the first company that chain is, you don't know who the second, third, or fourth are. And so effectively, anyone who has your cell phone number could potentially find out where you are right now or where you were at any given point in the past. It's a really terrifying situation that there's no good technological solution to because of the basic way that cell phone networks work. There are some legal protections to prevent the government from doing this. There was a couple cases last year in district courts, but even then, we know the government still spies on us through our phones as well. But at least there's some legal precedent, that can be used in court around the government. But there's nothing of like that for the private sector.
And even so, like the government could easily be in that chain that's picking up that resold and repackaged information. If they're, a person of interest, for instance, instead of going that route of dealing with a warrant or something, they could just hop into that chain of, oh, well, I'll get $300 from my boss or whatever at the FBI, and then I can keep tabs on that, organizer that's working with these folks or those folks. And there's no way that you'd ever know about that.
Certainly. And there's a technique that law enforcement uses called parallel construction, where they find out things about you or about whatever it is that they couldn't admit in court, right? They could not use this as evidence in court because of the way that they got this evidence. But once they have it, they go back and try to recreate the narrative and recreate their case based on that information that they shouldn't have had in the first place. So if the NSA, and this has been used with the NSA's spying programs, they can get information from the NSA, which they will never admit to getting in court because that would admit to the program existing effectively. And they would then, find a way to recreate evidence or target specific evidence gathering to validate that in a way that they could get it in court. So absolutely. And government agencies are recipients of this. There was a law in 2015, USA Freedom Act, I believe it was, that said that instead of the NSA isn't allowed to store these records anymore, but the phone companies can store them for like 90 days. And then the NSA or FBI or whoever just has to file an information request, which are often just completely like they're rubber stamped. You file this request and it's rubber stamped. And so there's no real oversight of these. So it just actually placed it from the information from the hands of the government, which not that I trust that anyway, to the hands of these private companies.
Right.
Just moved who owns it.
And of course, private companies have shown multiple times that they can't be trusted to have this information either. In terms of, apps on your phone, you mentioned Facebook. Is there a way to know, or should we just assume it's all of them? Like, which apps they are? I know recently there was this funny, not funny really, but kind of odd thing that happened where soldiers were using the Fitbit tracker on their base, and so they basically gave the outline of the entire supposedly secret base just by using a Fitbit. Is there a way to easily tell which apps are creeping on us, or should we just assume that every time we leave the house with one of these, that all of the apps are creeping on us?
Yeah, I would just assume that any app you open can and probably will figure out where you are. Even if you turn off location services, just based on the way the internet works, you have what's called an IP address. It just identifies your device, and that's how the stuff gets sent to your phone or your computer, and how that you send stuff, information back to Facebook or whoever, right? And you can generally identify where somebody is down to the city, sometimes the neighborhood, by that IP address. And again, it's one of those things that this is how the internet works. You can't really get around it. Unless you're sophisticated enough to use a VPN. But there's, that's a service that can kind of mask your address. But that costs money, and that requires some skill to set up for most people. So it's not, feasible for everyone to do, especially all the time. There was just a lawsuit filed this week, actually, against IBM of all companies. I didn't know this until this week. IBM owns the Weather Channel app. They actually, yeah, exactly. I had no idea, right? But California is suing IBM because the Weather Channel app, which, you kind of need to give it your location to know what the weather is by you. You'd figure that. They were also sending your location to advertisers, and they weren't giving any idea. They were not saying this anywhere in their terms of service, anywhere in the app. So even in instances where you need to give them your location, I think of a situation like Uber or Lyft, you need to give them your location, but you don't know what they're doing with it afterwards. So I would assume if you're out with a smartphone, assume that any app you have is going to do something with your location, even at the least just have it and know where you are.
So you mentioned California suing IBM because of this issue. Are there other, you mentioned there's no real legal framework about this because of the unfortunate and inherent way that these things work. So what would be the legal grounds for that sort of case? And do you think that we'd see more of these cases moving forward?
I think just because of how much attention that all of this kind of stuff has gotten, the Facebook leaks, all of this privacy violations, I'm thinking about like Equifax breaches and all of that. We're going to see more lawsuits against this. Some of it is going to be just basic contract law, where like you didn't say you were doing this with my information. And this is really where it comes down to, right? Our information, our just data that we provide by existing is being commoditized. It is, we are the product at this point. Even now when we pay for the service, we are still the product. And so when we are providing all of this profit-making material, historically that's just been labor, right? Labor has been what has created wealth. And now it's just our basic existence is creating wealth. Just, where we are, who we're talking to, and all of that. So there are going to be a number of legal challenges, I think. There are some in the courts now. There are some that I believe will be coming soon. For example, Marriott was just hacked late last year. There are talks of class action lawsuits around that. But unfortunately, no, there are no great legal frameworks. We do have some examples, though. There's in Europe, they have what's called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. And this is a fantastic framework, legal framework for protecting people's rights. It gives you, for example, the ability to say, as a European citizen, Facebook, I want to know everything you have on me. Or Apple, I want to know everything you've tracked about me. I've gone through, and many of these companies are doing it, whether or not you live in the EU or not, you can actually go and do this. And it's amazing. I requested mine from Apple, and it reminded me of a computer that I bought in 2002 that I couldn't even remember buying. This is the kind of stuff they're tracking about you, right? They have all of this in your databases. Unfortunately, there's not much in the way of preventative legislation to stop these kind of things. So what we need is legislation that says you cannot track people without their explicit consent, and there are punishments for doing so. Senator Ron Wyden has proposed some ideas like this. Unfortunately, they do not get a lot of traction in the Senate. The reasons are that this is tied to business interests. Most senators, including Ron Wyden himself, who is a good advocate for consumer privacy, they're all tied to business interests for the most part, and they're not going to pass things like this without a significant amount of pressure from people who use these services.
But therein lies another problem. Just like when Snowden leaked his findings, and I went to a talk that Glenn Greenwald gave, and he said, so often I hear people just say, "Oh, well, what does it matter? I have nothing to hide." And then, of course, his response was, "Okay, here's a piece of paper. Write down all your passwords for me." But I feel like that's often the case here is you'll see somebody using their phone, and if you say, "Hey, do you know that Facebook is tracking everything that you do," and then selling that on, they'll be like, "Yeah, whatever. I mean, I want to see pictures of my, friend's dinner or whatever." It's almost like the addiction to using these, or the necessity to use these for our, way of life that we've grown accustomed to, is almost worth that idea of losing all of your privacy for some people.
It shouldn't even be a choice, really. I mean, Facebook and Twitter and all of these, they have become the new commons. They've become the new town greens. Up here, living in New Haven, Connecticut, we have, an old New England style green where people used to go to get the news and catch up with people and do the shopping. And that's what Facebook and Twitter and Google News are at this point. But the problem is they are all privately owned. They all have their explicit or implicit political biases. And I'm not just talking about Republican versus Democrat. I'm talking about their defense of and service to the entire system, the profit system that they exist in. I mean, Facebook, when you post news on Facebook, right, they have these fact checkers who go through and they, say, okay, this is, quote, fake news or whatever, and they can actually stop things from spreading. But one of the companies or organizations they contract with is called the Atlantic Council, which is a who's who of donors to NATO. I mean, it's like Saudi Arabia and so this is a complete political bias, even if it isn't a political bias, towards Democrats or Republicans. Facebook doesn't primarily care, right? If it's Trump or Clinton in the White House, they might individually not like Trump for many reasons, but a lot of that's going to go back to their personal politics. But ultimately, they don't care. They just want to keep making their money. But people should be concerned. I'm glad you brought up that Glenn Greenwald example. I've seen him do that as well. It's go ahead, hand me your social security number, your credit card number, your mother's maiden name. And then see how you feel about your privacy and security. And just because you don't have something to hide right now, first of all, in this era of just these crackdowns on every single type of movement, you might have something to hide tomorrow. But also, we've seen many instances where people just look up stuff online about people that happened decades or years ago, and you try to use it against them. I mean, the famous example this week is the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez video of her dancing, which completely backfired on the right wing, right? Like, it just makes her look more likable, and it's a cute video. But this is the era that we're getting into, where people are going to start using this kind of stuff.
And I want to circle back as well, because you mentioned it doesn't help if you turn off the location services. And something that I've noticed when I'm traveling, I'll have my phone on airplane mode because I don't want to deal with, paying for foreign fees or anything. But, Maps still knows where you are, even in airplane mode. So is there any mode, or is there any way that, you can walk out of your house with your phone, and let's say you're listening to some podcast or something that's already downloaded, and have it on airplane mode or some mode where it's not being tracked? Or is that just not possible?
I mean, you'd have to have it on airplane mode and turn your Wi-Fi off and turn your Bluetooth off. And then you pretty much have no access to the outside world. So if you've downloaded some music or a podcast, then you can go listen to it on your run. But even then, if you have reason to be concerned, extremely concerned that you're going to be tracked, go just leave your phone at home. If you want to just go for your run and not have your run tracked, leave your Fitbit at home and turn off Wi-Fi, turn off Bluetooth, and turn on airplane mode, and then you should be in pretty good shape.
So I want to talk a little bit more about some more of the implications about this, the privacy issue, because, the apps that we use are far beyond just, let's say, Facebook and saying hey, let's meet at this event. But, for example, on my phone, I have a Planned Parenthood app, that tracks things like birth control and menstrual cycles and things like that. And so people have apps on their phone that deal with their mental and physical and emotional health. What kind of, or if you know of any sort of financial boom in that sector that's dealing not just with, oh, I like this color dress, but also with our literal mental and physical health?
So folks might have heard of, services like 23andMe or Ancestry, which offer, they send you a kit and you swab your cheek or whatever and send it back to them, and they tell you, you have a 50% English heritage and 20% this and that. And they can also give you some medical information. You have the genes that might make you more prone to heart disease or whatever it might be. And that's stuff that people want to know, especially when traditional healthcare is super expensive and out of the reach of most people. Maybe you can't afford to go see a doctor for that, but you can get the $100 to go get one of these tests. But there was just a report actually this week or late last week that GlaxoSmithKline and 23andMe are partnering up. So GlaxoSmithKline is a pharmaceutical company. So what do they need all of this personal information for? And even if it's not personal information, so even if 23andMe isn't saying here is Chris's personal health profile, even if they're aggregating it, they're still who gave consent to that? Even if you had read the terms of service or all of that, why does GSK need that information? And I'm so hesitant about it. And I can imagine a world where that actually would be super useful, right? So if we knew what illnesses people had or what the trends were, then medical research could target those things, right? But when the profit motive is involved, it's actually really scary. There have been other examples too, where CPAP machines for people with sleep apnea are reporting back to the manufacturer and the insurance company that you're not using it, or you're not using it for long enough, or you're not it has this effect or that effect, and it's that is so scary. Those machines, I know people who have sleep apnea, those machines are super uncomfortable. And they're extremely loud. So you have to make a balance between trying to get yourself to sleep, but also dealing with this really uncomfortable loud machine that might actually prevent you from sleeping anyway. But the insurance company's not going to look at that. They're just going to look and say, you're not using your machine properly, therefore we're cutting you off. It's a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's all stats to them, so they don't have to sit down with a person and say look, let's talk about how you're using this machine. And yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the digital chip thing. Like, people are like, oh, that would be great if somebody could just scan your arm and find out what the blood type you are and da-da-da-da. And it's like, yeah, but then they could also really do a lot of other things with a digital chip in your arm. That's terrifying. And also the idea that, you mentioned like, oh, if they don't have the name attached. Well, someone who was tracked in this New York Times article about the issue, they were able to figure out pretty easily who it was based on her movements. Like, oh, who lives here and works there? Oh, well, that's this person. So even if they just have your information, you can start to piece together who that is based on that information.
Yeah, that's right. And, you combine your location data with your Facebook check-ins, with your LinkedIn profile that says where you work, with even the correlations of who your friends are and what your friends have been doing. And it's not difficult. It's time consuming, but not super difficult to track people down. I mean, a few months ago, people started putting out lists of everyone who worked at ICE.
Right.
They just got it from LinkedIn. It wasn't hard to do. It wasn't some super secret hack of DHS computers. It was public LinkedIn information that LinkedIn immediately stopped access to and took down. They didn't realize what their own service was going to be used for. Yeah.
So I want to wrap up here with a bit of a shift into the know your rights question. And you've spoken about this before, of course. And reports have come through about folks having to show their phones to immigration, share their passwords and personal info. And then, of course, there's that interaction with law enforcement during an arrest or detainment. What would you say to folks specifically with regards to their digital privacy in a know your rights situation?
Sure. So first, in a situation with police, and this applies to any law enforcement. If you use biometrics like Face ID or Touch ID, fingerprint unlock, you can be compelled legally to unlock your phone using that method. You cannot be compelled to give your password. So if you're in a situation, let's say you're at a protest or something like that, right, where you have you're almost certain there's going to be some police interaction, turn your your fingerprint recognition off. And you cannot be compelled then to unlock your phone. There's a legal concept between something you have and something you know. You can't be compelled under the Fifth Amendment to give up something you know, which is your password, but you can be compelled to give up your fingerprint or your face. Those are things that you have. In dealing with Customs and Border Patrol, if you get stopped, on a bus or at the border, and CBP, by the way, considers the border to extend 100 miles inland, which is 2/3 of the American population, you have to make a call. You have the legal right to refuse, but they're going to give you a really, really hard time about it. So you need to make a call as to is it worth it for you to assert your rights at that moment and maybe be delayed for hours or even days, and potentially have to take your case to court, or are you going to let them look through your phone? What I do when I travel, especially internationally, is I make a backup that is encrypted of my phone through iTunes. I have an iPhone, and I store it separately. I wipe my phone and just install a couple games on it. And yeah, sure, if they ask, they can go ahead and look at my phone because I got a couple games on it. And then I restore my information when I get to my destination.
And is there something on your website that would tell people with an iPhone how to do that? Or is there a way for people to find out?
There will be. So if I can, I've started a new project recently called Tech for the People. It's techforthepeople.org. And I'm going to be writing about practical tips like this. I've already written a bit about how to use Signal to encrypt your text messages and keep your text messages safe. Because if you didn't know it, your text messages are readable by anyone, including your phone company. They can store and search those. And I've written a little bit about how to identify a threat model. So know who it is you're trying to protect yourself from, because everyone's needs are very different. And so that is actually one of the articles that I'll be writing soon for that website.
To find out more about Chris and his work, visit his website at chrisgaraffa.com.